Welcome back to the Vanderpod, the erudite and ebullient podcast of Bandersnatch Books. We're a small press publisher of treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. I'm Rachel Donahue, and today I have the immense delight of chatting with award-winning author and professor, Dr. Carolyn Weber. She holds her Honours BA from the University of Western Ontario, Canada, and her MPhil and DPhil degrees in English Literature from Oxford University. She's a Commonwealth Scholar and Inklings Project Fellow and has 30 years of experience speaking and writing on faith and the humanities across the globe. Her book, Surprised by Oxford, won the Grace Irwin Award, the largest prize for Best Christian Writing in Canada, and was made into a feature film, which is available on Amazon, Angel, and Apple TV platforms. Her other books include Holy is the Day, Sex and the City of God, and the upcoming 4 Questions God Asks. In addition, Dr. Weber has received a U.S. congressional recognition for her lifelong contributions to education as a woman of faith. She now resides in the land of my youth, the Tennessee countryside, with her husband and 4 spirited children, and she is, without a doubt, one of the most intelligent and winsome women I've ever met. So without further ado, Dr. Carolyn Weber, welcome to the Vanderpod.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. That is a really gracious introduction.
I love it. So I have deliberated long and hard about what direction to take this conversation. But as the resident poet of Bandersnatch Books, I'm thinking we should probably talk about poetry. So I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart. So for people who may not be familiar with your work, just a brief, maybe synopsis of Surprised by Oxford, kind of that story arc. And then in particular, Donne's sonnet, Batter My Heart, Three-Person God. I would really love to hear about your experience with that poem, reading it first as an unbeliever and then as a believer.
I love that poem. Well, yeah, in short, when I wrote Surprised by Oxford years ago, one of the poems that really changed my life was that poem, the Holy Sonnet number 14, Batter My Heart, Three-Person God by John Donne. I was a literature undergraduate student and I had to write on it. And I had a professor who really challenged me on how I interpreted it. At the time, I was not a person of faith. I did not grow up in a Christian home. There was kind of some loose Catholicism, but my mom had drifted away from that. Eventually, my parents had divorced. It was a loving home, but a broken home. My father drifted in and out of our lives, and I loved literature. It was really my escape and my world. And I was doing this degree that I adored. I adored my undergraduate professors, but I had this one particular reading that really had just really missed the mark, I think, because what I love about John Donne's Holy Sonnets was they're so honest about his own grappling with God and having a thoughtful faith. And so they're really beautiful and inviting and human. But I was not looking at them in that way at all. I was looking at them through politics and sexuality and all this kind of thing. And I had a professor who was courageous enough to kind of cut through that with me. It sort of sat with me differently, challenged me to think about the spiritual at work. So it's one of those, sort of tucked it away in your soul's pockets, and then it was when I later on went to go study at Oxford University as a Commonwealth Scholar, I eventually started looking into the Christian faith and became a Christian myself when I was studying there. And then, of course, the sonnets took on a whole other meaning for me.
Yeah, I loved reading about like that whole journey for you and the role that poetry and the memorization of poetry really captured your heart. And in a way that, like, you're wrestling through these ideas intellectually, but then the poetry just kind of gets at the heart of the matter and connects on a different level, maybe.
Yeah, it's funny because I had written about exactly that topic, how I was very blessed to have a very loving mom, which I think is the greatest gift we can have, I loving parents in many ways, but my mom adored poetry. Had us reading young, always would take us to the bookmobile. I don't, if I'm showing my age, but you're like really cool book on like bookstore on wheels or library on wheels that would come and visit. And it was always really exciting. And she always had memorized poetry on the tip of her tongue, not in any kind of show-off way, just out of pure joy. And she loved musicals too. So she had a great memory for lyrics and she could sing any song within the first few notes. So I grew up with a great love for poetry and how it can express what we need to express when we can't express it. Right? So it became for me a sort of sense of a language of illusion, other ways of speaking. right? That say what you wish you could say.
Yeah.
And so I was really blessed to have kind of a reservoir of that as a child.
Yeah. I love that. So were there any poems along the way as you were making that transition from unbelief to belief? Like were there any other particular poems or passages that really kind of gave you language
Mm.
for that process, that kind of helped you through that process from relying on kind of this
Mm.
intellectual side, this knowledge, to faith?
That's a great question. Well, at the time when I arrived at Oxford, you have to choose an area that you're going to focus in on for
Hmm.
graduate school. And I ended up looking at the Romantic poets because I was really drawn to their notion of infinite
Hmm.
longing. And so you're reading these poems and you're getting a sense, some are Christian writers, some are
Hmm.
not, but this kind of aching for the spiritual world right as things are starting to enter industrialization and things like that as well. And so I was reading a lot of Romantic poems in depth, Wordsworth, Shelley, Byron, Goethe, all of these, and they were really planting these seeds of what are we longing for?
Hmm.
I was longing, the Sehnsucht, right? As
Yep.
Lewis takes from the German of that infinite longing, that homesickness for something that we can't quite put words to again. So I was reading it in all of these poets. And so I was really being steeped in that. And then, of course, the the Romantic poets are predominantly influenced by John Milton. So Paradise Lost, and, there's that huge antecedent influence as well. Probably Milton, the Miltonic imagination is probably the most influential on the Romantic.
Hmm.
So you can't read Paradise Lost and not be moved, even as an unbeliever, because he brings the characters of Genesis and the
Hmm.
fall so alive. Even if there's poetic license, he's justifying the ways of God to men. So he's making Adam and Eve really human people we can identify with. He's
Hmm.
how evil works, how Satan is so seductive. So it draws you in. So I was reading those backstories too.
Hmm.
But I was particularly drawn to the notion of the sublime. So feeling fear and awe and this mountaintop experience that's in so much Romantic poetry. Wordsworth's The Prelude, even Tintern Abbey, Intimations of Immortality,
Hmm.
Coleridge. I loved Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poetry. I loved his definition of the imagination. Basically, our imaginations being like little miniature imitations of God's.
Hmm.
The infinite I am, bearing out in the repetition of our own little I ams in the primary and secondary
Hmm.
imagination, I just thought was really fascinating. Not, of course, thinking about, oh, are we made in God's
Hmm.
image? Like all of those things opening up from that and our need to create. I really love The Ancient Mariner.
Hmm. Yes.
Beautiful poem, right? It is so freaky. like most
Yes.
like most Coleridge poems are, but Ancient Mariner, 7 parts, this ballad, so sing-songy, so mesmerizing, and yet really it's basically a psychomachia, right? It's a
Hmm.
battle of the soul,
Hmm.
a journey of the soul on the sea, which is one of the oldest allegories we have, right? Is that our
Hmm.
soul is like a boat on the ocean. And how he really, through the Ancient Mariner's tale, takes you through what sin is
Hmm.
and how we commit sin, shooting the albatross without giving it any thought.
Hmm.
We don't give any thought to how much destruction we cause or why we're even sinning. And then the consequences of that for himself and for his crew,
Hmm.
and that compulsion to share what's happened to you, to the wedding guests. So I was so moved by that poem on every level, stylistically and content wise. It was another one that really planted a seed for me.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. So thinking about the image of God and us as like sub-creators,
Mhm.
I've been thinking a lot about joy and grief as it relates to our work. You've written a couple memoirs, and in it, you're sharing these moments of joy and grief. And can you talk about that process and like that interplay of those emotions through poetry, but then also through your process of writing and our experience of God? And
Mm.
I just love to hear what you have to say about that.
It's such a great question because I think it goes back to the paradox that was introduced to me in John Donne's poetry, and particularly the Holy Sonnets, that God is a paradox. You can hold these two things in one hand.
Hmm.
So a paradox is actually a seeming contradiction, not a full contradiction,
Mhm.
which is very much the nature of God. So these holy sonnets could be about, about praise and about weeping, about joy and about sorrow, about struggling and about rejoicing.
Hmm.
And I think poetry is a particularly poignant genre for that
Hmm.
because it's so condensed and compressed and makes us see things anew, we can hold those things in tight spaces together,
Hmm.
which is why I think the Psalms are so powerful because they allow for that whole range of emotion. C.S. Lewis names his own memoir, right? Surprised by Joy,
Hmm.
which is evocative of that sense of longing. And he's actually takes that title from a Wordsworth poem
Hmm.
called Surprised by Joy. And in that poem, Wordsworth is actually writing about experiencing joy and then actually remembering the grief of somebody he used to experience it with is now gone.
Hmm.
He's in that the tomb now has someone in it who used to be with him in the living. So joy and grief are really entwined. And what's neat about, I think, Lewis taking that particular poem is it does betray his love for the romantics. But I think it also conveys how we've all felt that, almost that shock of surprise,
Hmm.
as we said with joy and betrayal even, or guilt or something that we're feeling joy when we're grieving,
Yeah.
or also that shock into remembrance of I'm feeling joy and then, oh, this person isn't here with me to feel it with me. But that doesn't negate the joy.
Hmm.
And then that a joy in grief too.
Hmm.
I mean, grief is a great gift.
Hmm.
It's not a gift we would ask for, but when we're grieving people we've loved dearly,
Hmm.
that's an immense joy in a
Hmm.
sense. And even if it's a complicated grief, there's something in it that allows us to feel deeply much rather than not feeling at all.
Hmm.
So I think he evokes that poem because also as a Christian and for a memoir about a Christian conversion, he's taking it one step further with Wordsworth and saying, actually, our joy will be made complete precisely because the tomb is empty. The story doesn't end with the tomb being full.
Hmm. Yeah.
So they're really closely entwined.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Taking this conversation a slightly different direction, I want to hear about how poetry has shaped your journey in motherhood. You have 4 children,
Yeah.
and I, as a mother of 4 children, with whom I share poetry, I would love to hear about that relationship. And then also, I'm curious, like, have you written any poetry of your own?
Well, yes, I've written poetry of my own. It's been a genre that I've kind of dipped in and out of. I tend to actually write it more in seasons of grief.
Hmm.
I ended up publishing a few smaller volumes of poetry, and I've been asked, I've made some contributions. So I did for Imago and for a few different poetry events where I was commissioned or asked to do a poem. So I've done some of those projects. I really like writing devotional type poetry that is reflective about God's presence in our lives in some way. I love nature and how that points to that. But it's a genre that I do for a while and then step out of.
Hmm.
It sort of has seasons for me.
Hmm.
In terms of my own children, it's so funny, Rachel, because I don't know about yours, but I have our daughter's oldest. She loves literature, loves poetry, loves reading everything. Very, very just everything bookish she's about. Then I have twin boys. Catcher and pitcher, baseball's their life, and there's that. And I've really learned, okay, they're not going to sit and read a poem easily, like that doesn't speak to them in the same way. So, what are sneaky ways of sharing poetry? Years ago, when I taught them Ancient Mariner, things like that, they loved it.
Hmm.
So, like, there's ways that thinking about a mariner theme, given the interest in fishing,
I love
we
it.
did Ancient Mariner, and then we read Old Man in the Sea, and we did things like that. But sort of sneakier ways. I think it's different for every child. But what I do love about poetry for young children is there is something very powerful and magical about sound and rhythm,
Hmm.
particularly formed poetry.
Hmm.
It's conducive to memorization, even if you're not trying.
Hmm.
It's already a mnemonic device in that sense in terms of its own form. So they just became familiar with poems we would just read that were favorites.
Hmm.
Again, things you just recite when you're together. And then I've been teaching, I'm homeschooling too. So I
Hmm.
don't homeschooling math and science. I wouldn't do that to people I love. I do humanities with the kids and teaching them now poetry this year as teenagers, older teenagers, was just really different too,
Yeah.
because they're really interested in the war poetry, World War I
Hmm.
poetry. right? How that was shifting and changing from the world, what it used to be beforehand in the Georgian poets. So
Mhm.
there's a different ethos they're bringing to it, a different understanding of the world and the
Mhm.
questions they're trying to ask. And of course, they can read more political poetry and that sort of thing as well. So
Mhm.
I think what's lovely about poetry is it opens up a world, a huge world from a very concise box, you know.
Yeah.
So it's really neat to see them enjoy poetry in new and different ways as they mature too.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of families at like homeschool conventions and workshops and things, and they're always asking, how do we do poetry? You know, it just seems this big, scary thing. And I think some people think that poetry, like you have to get into it and study the meter and be able to
Mhm.
analyze a poem. And I thought, just enjoy it, just read it aloud, just take what you can from it
Yes.
and read widely. And I hope my children are taking away at least some enjoyment of even just the fun poems of childhood, Robert Louis Stevenson and A. A. Milne, and some of those things that capture what it is to be a child,
Absolutely.
that unlocks the door to some of these things that are going to carry maybe the weightier emotions of being an adult and dealing with joy and grief and wrestling with faith. And yeah, so that's, yeah.
Comfortable with it and experiencing it rather than studying it. I think it's Billy Collins has that really great poem, is it Introduction to Literature, Introduction, where he talks about like basically beating a poem to death is kind of what we do with a hose, instead of
Yes.
just allowing us to read it and be immersed in it
Mm.
without being too heavy-handed or didactic with young ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the musicality of it is so
Mm-hmm.
attractive. But I think you're right to also just have them enjoy it and for it not to be intimidating. It's all relative because I also get students, they've done novels or plays or poetry, something they feel intimidated by something else they haven't
Mm-hmm.
spent time in. Sometimes it's just all relative too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I hope this is an encouragement to anyone who's listening to just dive in, just
Yeah.
dabble in a bunch of different things. Find a voice you like and read deeper.
Do you mind sharing how old your children are?
My oldest is 18 going on 19 and our youngest is 9, and they're all stair steps 3 years apart. So,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you're a little younger. Like mine are between sort of 13 and 20. So
mhm.
yeah, I mean, just thinking about writing and motherhood, I still I still wonder how we do it.
Right.
I just I've never really been able to talk to anyone I know who's writing and mothering in whatever way, shape, or form that is, or whether that's caregiving or something else too, right? What schedule they have or how they pull it off or how, it's a good day if you're showered sometimes. That's great.
Yep.
You just write in the cracks or you write when somebody's not throwing up or you write, when
Yep.
there's not something happening. But yeah, I've always been fascinated by people's schedules, if they work daily or do they work
Mhm.
in concentrated ways or do they work more immersed? I'm probably an immersion writer. I always admired Madeline L'Engle working out in her chicken coop because she's like, nobody would find her there.
Mhm.
But yeah, that kind of connection between creativity and parenting, mothering, close to my
Mhm.
heart to think through as well.
Yeah. Would you say that being a writer has made you a better mother?
Oh, um, I would think it's the other way around.
Mm.
I think being a mother has made me a better writer. Not that that's a necessity by any means. We don't have to be mothers or fathers or married or whatever else. We're already beloved in the Lord.
Mhm.
But it's made me pay attention more.
Mm.
For me personally, it's
Yeah.
it's given me more of a humility and a carefulness of paying attention. Madeline Engel again said, "Don't write anything that you wouldn't want your children to read."
Yes.
When they grow
Yep.
up. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, though. Like there's a different sort of, I think perhaps a, a deeper empathy. And
Mm.
again, I don't think it necessarily means that just being a mother entails that. I mean, I think there's lots of forms of caregiving, mothering in other ways, parenting in other ways, but it's that paying attention to really that we're all stories and we're all texts, and there's so much
Mhm.
more than what meets the eye, which I think Christians are alert to anyway, right? We're humanetical readers,
Mhm.
so when we read scripture, we know there's more than what meets the eye. That's what parables are about. But meeting people and recognizing that's the case too.
Yeah. 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 That's true. Yeah. I think being a mother for me in my writing journey being a mother gave me permission to play.
Mhm.
I think that's the biggest impact that, I mean, paying attention, yes.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think just getting down with them. I mean, there are a few things like motherhood that will humble you and bring you to the
Yes.
end of yourself.
Absolutely. And you think it's going to be easier when they're little, and like when they get older, and that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
Like I think when they're little, you're just trying to save their lives, from trachea-sized objects. I remember with the twins going in two different directions, and you just rock, paper, scissors, who you can save first, like who's the slower runner,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yep.
As they get older, you're still also just trying to save their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't
Yep.
really, change, but there's this efficiency too. I think I do find it makes me work more efficiently
Mm-hmm.
because your time is never really your own ever again,
Yeah.
even when they're grown. Like
Yeah.
because if somebody's going to call,
Mm-hmm.
so there's this efficiency. I don't think you have writer's block in the same way, the luxury of writer's block,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're going to go away for a weekend, like that means,
Yeah.
somebody's helped you with the kids, or, your husband's doing this, or you're going to be thinking about what else they need when you get home, or, whatever
Mm-hmm.
else. Even if you are working in your office or something like that, like my mom was Hungarian, and there was this old Hungarian saying, like, once you become a mother, you always sleep with one eye open, like your whole life.
Oh, that's a great saying. I've not heard that.
Yeah, I think there's only you become more efficient in some ways.
Yeah, when you've got that really small margin of time, if it's going to happen, it has to happen right now.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, that's good. It's always encouraging to me to hear other mothers who have done this and have done it successfully, just to hear about their journey. And, we're all wrestling with some of the same things is just encouraging. Let's see. What were the names of your poetry collections? I'm curious to read them now.
Oh, yeah, there's like Summering and Seasons, and there's another one. I wrote most of them years ago when I was living in Canada, so they had seasonal names.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've written poems on the Stations of the Cross, where I did that for the Imago event. And so, yeah, they've been in different publications and things too.
Okay. All right. We'll have to look them up. Maybe we can share some links in our show notes so people can find those. Okay. So you have another book that is coming that is slightly different than the memoirs and the poetry that you've published. 4 Questions God Asks. Can you talk somewhat about that?
Yeah, I was really blessed to work with Rachel Welcher. I love her dearly. She's a writer I admire, and an amazing mom and sister in Christ. And she was really kind. This was a topic that was close to my heart for some time, just from teaching students for so long
Mm.
in different types of campuses and ministries, secular or Christian. A lot of people asking questions of God. And I understand that.
Mm.
We all do, where are you, God? And what do you want from me? And, you know, do you love me? And, even there, those kind of questions that we're always asking, they're really understandable. But as I was reading through scripture, when I was early in my faith, I was really struck by how many questions God's asking of us, and actually how it's all the way through scripture.
Mm.
And that a loving God would want that kind of relationship with us, would be asking
Mm.
questions of us. It's incredible to me, that the creator of all would want to ask me a question. And how many questions Jesus asks of us and of people he meets. And so I became really interested in the art of the question. And, it is like a hook,
Yeah.
right? It is a quest, it leads us on a journey.
Mm.
It invites relationship. So I saw sort of most of the questions fitting 4 main categories,
Mm.
like kind of the where are you from Genesis in the fall,
Mm.
and where is your brother or sister, all the way through to do you love me? And that really most of our questions fit in those. And so it's a different book for me because it has a little bit of literature in it. I've always been an academic too, and it has some memoir, and it has a lot of grief.
Mm.
2 deaths in my family during the year that I wrote it, and actually a third towards the end. So it was really very much a processing of grief too.
Mm.
And I think that's when a lot of our questions also come to the surface,
Mm. Yeah.
about God and who he is and what he's capable of. And do I believe he is who he says he is? Those kind of questions. So it's a bit of a mishmash. I don't know if there's that kind of genre, like if you could pick that on Amazon.
Yep.
It's different from anything else I've written in that regard, but Rachel was a really wonderful person to partner with on it because she understood the vision, and we're hoping that it will be invitational to people
Mm,
regardless of where they're at in their walk with the Lord.
yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay. So getting to our popcorn questions.
Okay.
How long on average does it take you to write a book?
Oh gosh. We said on average, like maybe 15 years. I would say, because I mean, something like Surprised by Oxford, I had thought about for a long, I mean, a lot of books have percolated a long, long time for me.
Hmm.
But Surprised by Oxford was my conversion. I never anticipated writing it ever.
Hmm.
As a, like I never anticipated writing memoir. I was trained as an academic,
Hmm.
and it grew out of years and years of talking to students and unbelieving family and friends and that. So I probably wrote it over the course of several years in bits and pieces. And then finished it, ironically, when I had twins and I had 3 kids under 3 and I had to hide in a closet and it forced me to finish it.
That's amazing.
Sabbatical year.
Wow.
Okay, I'm hiding. I'm writing. I literally typed on a 2x4 hiding in a closet. So there's that. But I think I've had other books that, yeah, have really meandered and, they take a long time. They're just a season in your life where I haven't been a full-time writer. I've never had that.
Hmm.
You're homeschooling or you're
Hmm.
caregiving or whatever else. So I don't know how long it would take under ideal circumstances, but it's usually a few years. But
What?
I don't want anyone to be discouraged by it. But I think there's many wonderful women and men too, right? Like who moms and fathers or whatever. If you've written a poem in your bedside journal, like that's huge.
That is true. Just the act of getting words on paper
Right, right,
is worth celebrating. Yes,
right.
it's very
Exactly.
true. What were some of your favorite books as a child?
Such a mean question because there's so many. Oh, I'm a huge fan. I think children's picture books are so important if you go way back to when they're little. I have a friend of mine who teaches a course on that. It's just really, she's just a wonderful children's librarian. The power of children's picture books.
Mm.
Winnie the Pooh and Beatrix Potter and Wind in the Willows, like
Mhm.
beautiful stories, but also beautiful illustrations.
Mhm.
And to start asking those good questions, the development of their moral imagination. So I loved, oh gosh, there were so many. I mean, I think about Velveteen Rabbit and
Mhm.
Ferdinand the Bull.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so many wonderful ones. And then growing up, I mean, my mom just had an open shelf concept. Like I just read whatever was around, which I think is
Mhm.
really strategic for kids,
Mhm.
is to leave books around. Always just have books around. And there's something more inviting about books, I would argue, than even electronic books.
Mhm.
There's just curiosity on a rainy day,
Mhm.
of having poetry anthologies, things like that around, and you'll just leaf through them.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I think that the old book makers had it right, where they even illustrated, even in black and white, like, Dickens and everything else, having something kind of draw you in a little bit,
Yeah.
even with a really beautiful running chapter head or something like that. But I don't know. I loved all those books. So I remember reading Jane Eyre at a very, very young age,
Mm.
Jane Austen at a young age.
I love it.
Yeah.
Reaching high on the shelf. All right. If you could have lunch with any author in history, who would you pick and what would you want to talk about?
Oh gosh. That's such a good one too. Right off the top of my head, I would love to have lunch with Lewis because I know we'd have several pints. And we could discuss things deep in our cups, as he would say, right?
Yes.
Sober and drunk, twice like the Persians. But it would be a good British pub lunch. Dorothy Sayers as well.
Yes.
And she was a beautiful poet.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that. And such a fascinating life too. There's just so many. I would think, of course, the romantic poets.
Hmm.
It would be delightful, Keats or Shelley or Mary Shelley.
Hmm.
And I mean, of course, oh, yeah. I mean, the proverbial question, right? You would really want to ask Shakespeare, did you write all of those? Could you settle this for us?
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. If you could forget the plot of a single book to reread it again for the first time, which book would you choose?
Oh, wow. If I could forget it, like just to read it out of for sheer,
Just to experience it for the first time again.
Again, there's so many. I think a couple come to mind. Is that okay to cheat?
Sure.
I think Dickens,
Hmm.
because Dickens is such a great study in character, and he's been accused of having formulaic plots, like they can be somewhat, you can kind of expect what's going to happen.
Mhm.
That it would be nice to have that erased, so I wouldn't know, with like Great Expectations or Bleak House. But kind of an outlier would be Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca.
I've not read that one.
Ooh, it's a doozy.
I'm going to have to add that to my to be read pile.
It's a very interesting read, and I've definitely taught it to like later high school, early
Hmm.
college, a
Hmm.
little bit later read, and it's a mystery and a thriller. I won't give it away, but it's somewhat of a retelling of Jane Eyre, which is a retelling of Bluebeard, right?
I
With a
love it.
twist. A lot of these stories are just retelling of Beauty and the Beast or Bluebeards.
Yeah, I love it. All right. I'm going to have to add it to my list. All right. And then last popcorn question. Here at Bandersnatch, we publish treasures found off the beaten path. So, what is a bookish treasure from off the beaten path that you could recommend to our listeners?
Hmm. Actually, there's one that it sounds interesting, but it's a little bit strange because it's not a literary recommendation.
Hmm.
It's called The Ties That Bind. It's by Dr. Alan Godwin,
Hmm.
who I'm very fortunate has also become a friend of mine. But it's a really interesting read. I don't want to give it away because there's a reveal at the end. It's a psychological book. It's a book in which he's talking about the power of story, but also the stories that we tell ourselves and how we can get caught in those. So it's probably more of a social cultural read,
Hmm.
but it made me think about stories differently because he sort of presents it as a psychological concept and then also how it happens in our world culturally. And I just found it to be just a really interesting read to think about the power stories have on us
Yeah.
in ways that can be fortresses and destructive and closing off, and also especially through something like the gospel, how they can also be really life-giving and open to ambiguity and to
Mm.
a healthy sense of humility.
Mm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Another one for the list.
But there's just so many, it's like, when your brain just goes blank because you're like, oh,
Yes. There's so many good books in the world.
yeah. So I love what you're doing with your press as well, because that's really powerful. And David Jack's books, his translations, well, I say translations, but he works out of Scotland on predominantly George MacDonald books.
Hmm.
So translations from the Scots, the old Scots.
Mm.
He does beautiful editions, and he has a small but very committed press, and he's committed to making these beautiful editions. So I had just done the foreword to two lesser known novels by George MacDonald.
Mhm.
And he's another favorite author of mine, and another one that would be neat to have lunch with because, he also was so prolific and had such an interesting range. And of course, Lewis said he never wrote anything without something of George MacDonald in it.
Mhm.
But, these are actually the adult novels he wrote, and they're very beautiful.
Mm.
So I was very blessed to work with David on The Elect Lady and Heather and Snow.
Mm.
And they're both very beautiful novels. Heather and Snow was just lovely. So it was neat to see other works by George MacDonald coming to light,
That's wonderful.
because we know, Princess and the Goblin and, a lot of
Sure.
that, but to know how he wrote, and they were beautiful novels,
Hmm.
really presenting the gospel too, but not in heavy-handed ways at all. I mean, it actually reminded me to some degree of Dickens in some ways. I mean, and they deal with really powerful themes.
Mm. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Caro, for joining us on the Vanderpod. It has been an absolute delight.
Thank you. Went way too quickly as I knew it would with
I know.
Thank you so much for having me. It was just a delight.
Well, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Until next time, may you find bookish treasures in your wanderings off the beaten path. Thanks for listening in to our conversation today on the Vanderpod. We hope you'll check out our full catalog at bandersnatchbooks.com. The Vanderpod is produced by Rachel S. Donahue, A.B. Donahue, and Carolyn Claire Givens. Audio engineering by SDG Morgan. Artwork by Evelyn Warnamundi. Many thanks to our friend Chris Slayton of Son of Laughter for our theme song, Cricket in a Jar. Find links and more in the show notes.